All right, we're going to get started. Good evening and welcome to our fourth in the series of evenings with Artifacts. No, I think that's fifth. Welcome to our fifth in the series of evenings with Artifacts. I'm Heather Nickerson, the CEO and co-founder of Artifacts. I'm joined with my co-founder and CSO, Ellen Goodwind, and also with our guest this evening, founder and lead archivist, Brooke Lake of Monocurate. Brooke has had an amazing career spanning the decades, working with all sorts of different documents and photos and different memorabilia. She'll be discussing tonight the differences between preservation, restoration, and archiving, and we'll give you also some tips of what to do, what not to do, and some helpful resources as we dive into the conversation. So with that, let's get started. Brooke, let's kick off with, could you tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and what led you into the wonderful world of archiving?
Yeah, so hello, everybody. My name is Brooke Lake. I am, as Heather just said, the founder and lead archivist for Monocurate. I got into this field really through school. I just was taking classes and kind of found my niche, and it just went from there. It wasn't very exciting. It's just one of those things, right time, right place. And I worked through, I did my master's degree at Simmons and then worked with various institutions. And then finally, I worked in the private sector with a conservator here in Austin, Texas, and ended up going out on my own to do archiving for individuals and community-based organizations. And that's where I am now. So we're here in Austin and have a brick and mortar business in Northwest Austin, where we serve just the local community and make sure that everybody is able to have everything preserved the way that they would like to.
And that's great, Brooke. And one of your, I think your overarching motto and goal is archives for all. Could you touch briefly on that before diving into your presentation?
Yeah, so through my work with institutions, it became quite clear that while archives are totally accessible to individuals and the public, and they are meant to be, when it comes to preserving our own personal items, that can be a little more difficult, where you can't just call, the state archive and ask, hey, I have my grandma's old pictures, can you help me? And of course, they can point you in the right direction, and they always will. But there wasn't one person, at least in Austin, who was able to do all of that collection work for larger collections for people. And so through the conservation private practice, I was like, hey, there's definitely a market for that. And there are a lot of people coming in here that basically want preservation done rather than conservation. And so I just kind of ran with that during COVID.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that background. I think at this point, let's turn it over to you to go through the presentation. I know you've got a lot to cover tonight, and looking forward to hearing your advice. I know that I could definitely use it myself. I'm sure I'll be guilty as charged for some of those do not tips. So over to you.
Yeah, so here we go. So again, Monocurate, we are going to talk about caring for your personal collection materials. The best way to cover this, I think, is to just basically go over where we're at. So what's the difference between different fields? What's the benefit of having an archive, especially for an individual? That's often overlooked. Common material that we'll find in family collections or individual collections, and how to preserve those items properly. And I'm really going to focus that section on what you should buy, because everybody needs to know what is the correct storage, rather than just going to Hobby Lobby and hoping for the best. So what's the difference? Restoration. I do not do restorations. Archivists do not do restorations. Everybody is under the assumption that I will restore your grandma's photographs. I do not do that. This illustrates why I will not do that. Restorations do not take into consideration the historical context of an item. When we think shabby chic, like we're taking an old dresser, from who knows when, and we're washing it out or painting it a different color, that's what we would call a restoration. There's not really any accreditations. There's not an official degree program. It's just something that we do to things where we, replace a permanent aspect of this item, and it's not reversible. So we can't go back. Once we paint that dresser, I mean, maybe you can sand it back down, but you know, you took the handles off, they're gone. We're not getting it back to the original. Conservation, however, has an advanced degree. They work towards the long-term preservation of objects. They can bleach paper, they can do all sorts of crazy stuff. That it's deeply rooted in chemistry. It's a very, very specific degree of what we would consider a preservation, and they can reverse damage, all sorts of stuff that, again, as a preservation or archivist, we don't really focus on that. This is much more advanced. When you see, you know, something in a museum or in an archive that's been, you know, like this example here, where there's this drastic before and after, that's probably a conservation treatment. Historic preservation, this comes up also. And if you were to look, because I've had clients say this as well, like I was looking for historical preservation for my documents and I couldn't find anything. And yeah, we're talking about buildings when we're talking about historical preservation. We're talking about connecting the community with their history, making things more livable, and that's not us. We do archival preservation. What is archival preservation? Well, we all hold degrees in library and information science. That's how you become an archivist. We minimize all damage. We do our best to do that. We remove, you know, fasteners and rubber bands. It sounds simple, but it can get a little wild. And we repair material as well, but we maintain the original format. Everything we do is reversible, just like conservation. But our focus is more on keeping the context of the item. So we try not to do any drastic changes. This is an example of a preservation project that we did here at Monocurate, where we were able to preserve this album by, we just cleaned it up, put the book cloth back on that was already there, and interleaved it to ensure that the pictures didn't stick to each other. So this is archival preservation, and this is the context in which we are going to talk through the rest of this. So benefits of a family archive. Again, we want to focus on that information that we have in our documents and our pictures and what kind of narrative we can create out of our collections. So that's organization, archival arrangement, archival description, cleaning, repairing, and preserving materials, and improving access. That is my #1 priority for everything that we do. We want to improve access. I feel that Artifacts and I see eye to eye on this. This is, you know, the big goal for everybody, and probably including those that are here. We want to be able to see our material and share our material. And so we're going to talk about how that's possible. So what do archives do? Well, when we think about a family archive, we probably don't think about it at all, because when we think about archives, we think about ivory towers and we think about these important people and their documents that are in the archive. But archives do much more than that. And they are for everybody. They are for the public, and they're for our house also. We can have them. They, you know, again, as this says, we are here to trace family and community stories, capture and share memories. And it's important to note that family archives are unique and they are irreplaceable. If we lose grandma's recipe card, it's possible we won't have that back. So it's really important that we have proper identification and we care for these items and we allow access that is functional. They are the family memory, right? So that's why we keep it, because it's important. It tells a story, and it's really important for all of us to understand where we came from and who we are and how we got here. And these documents are evidence of that. So it's, you know, crucial to maintain all of this, because if we don't have it, then we don't have our stories. It's really easy to lose that and forget things and so on and so forth. So we need to know what we have, we need to make a plan, and we need to follow through. So you can artifact it all day long, but if we want to preserve those physical materials, then there's other steps we need to take. So the #1 thing that I tell everybody that comes through my office is I need to know what you have. You need to know what you have. You know, like, do you have VHS tapes? Do you have old passports? That's been a really common thing that we've seen lately. Or like family, grandfather's passport from his honeymoon. Like, how cool is that? We can see where he went and how he got there. Like, oh, I didn't even know he stopped in France. Like, I wish he would have talked about that. You know, if we have that stuff ahead of time, we can improve access to these stories by asking him, what was that like? Like, what was that, a layover, or you know, what's going on? A lot can be derived from little bits of information that it's so easy to overlook all of it. So common material in family archives and family collections is your biographical materials. So we're talking vital records and such. That's, you know, when you think about a genealogical record, that's your biographical material. Correspondence, so many letters. Everybody has letters. Diaries and journals. I wish we had more of those. Those are always fun, but you're lucky if you have one. Professional files, tracing, you know, your father's career. That can be interesting in hindsight as well. And of course, photographs. So what should you do as a normal person who is trying to tackle your piles of family archival materials? You need to know what you have and what formats you have. It's really important that we don't store things together. So knowing what's there and being able to separate things out, it makes it, one, easier to go through it, and also kind of gives you a starting point of how to think about it long term. It's also important to know, are there duplicates or copies? You might not need to keep everything. It's okay to weed through your piles. It's okay to toss things out. Maybe we only need one copy of, you know, your third grade newsletter, not the 50 that your mom made and threw in a folder. Where is it located? I know for me personally, I'm guilty of this, where I have things all over my house. We want to aggregate and put it in one spot. And do you have the full extent of the collection? A lot of siblings, when a parent passes, things get split up. It's, you know, that's fine. But if we are able to figure out a way to aggregate that either digitally through a drive or through Artifacts, or just, you know, a Dropbox folder, anywhere where we can all see what's there, it's going to be a lot easier to create these stories and narratives. So again, things to think about: where did this, you know, material come from? Who created it? Are there writings or notes that can tell us a lot? Maker's marks, if we don't know who's in the picture, sometimes we can look at the back and say, oh, it was in St. Louis. Well, that's where Aunt Cheryl lived. So maybe that's her. And of course, dates are very important. So when we put all of this together, you know, what's the story? So if you have a box, a shoebox of letters such as this, as well as other items, like, it can tell an entire story of a family. It might not seem like it now because it's all over the place and it feels like junk, and oh, who'd ever want to know that? But it does tell a story. And there are several community archives, probably even where you live, that would love to have some of this material donated, especially when you start thinking about professional files. Now you're talking about businessmen in the community, or maybe your grandma did something really, you know, interesting with the garden club. Like, that would be helpful for them to have that to trace regular people's activities within the community, as well as, of course, for your own family history. So considerations here: your provenance, you know, again, creator and dates, those are really important. The types of material, and is any of the material digitized or separated? We need to constantly think about that when we're going through our collections. So our proper handling and storage. This is what everybody always wants to know. So what do we need to do when we're looking at our collections? Well, we need to evaluate: are there rips and tears? Are there tapes or fasteners? I bet you there is. And we'll talk about how we can deal with some of those problems. So when we're prioritizing a collection, as Ellen should, as we can see here, at no fault of her own, we want to look for acidic paper. We want to look for use of adhesives. When we have our static cling albums, they're actually using an adhesive. And as we can see over here in this blown up, not great shot, it's turning yellow. So we don't want that to happen, because eventually it's going to damage the photos that it's sitting on, or worse, the photos can actually start to bond to the paper, sometimes depending on the adhesive used here. Or, you know, another is that it can become loose, and then we won't know the order or the spot that it was on the page. And when we talk about original order in archives, that's very important and not something people are very familiar with, but we really want to keep the order in which things were placed. Like, Ellen's mother put this album together for her, and there's probably a reason why, you know, one picture's in the middle rather than not. And so we want to preserve that. So yes, again, acidic paper, use of adhesives, if anything's loose, detaching or crumbling pages, like our black scrapbook albums that I think everybody has from their grandparents. As you can see here, we're losing the paper, so we have loss. And the words are starting to fall out as well, so we won't have those captions for much longer. Another is, of course, photo discoloration, which again, I think we're all familiar with. But having the acidic paper is just, that black paper is so bad. It will ruin everything. So if we can pull things out, great. A lot of clients will scan the pages as is and then remove the photos for them to prevent that. So when we're prioritizing our collection, a big thing we can do is let our collection kind of tell us what's going on. You know, just kind of look at it and take notes. We tell everybody you really want to take notes while you're going through your collection, because you're going to forget what was where and what was what. So do you have a box of loose unidentified photographs? Everybody does. So we don't want that. The problem with loose unidentified photographs is eventually you're not going to know who's in the picture, where they came from, why they're there, or, oh no, they got wet in the basement. I forgot I had that box of photos down there and now they're ruined. Or curling, when we see curling photos, it's usually from a humidity issue. It's really common if it's stored in an attic or a hot closet or in a basement garage. It happens all the time, but don't worry, they can be flattened. The other is opening up a box and smelling vinegar. So we don't want that to happen. That's film deteriorating. It's really common with your Super 8 and 8mm film. If you smell vinegar, really your best bet is to probably toss it. You can put it in cold storage, but there's not a whole lot you can do for that unless you go to a film conservator. Paper stapled together. Get fasteners off your paper. It will rust. This image right here on the far right, this is rust. This is rust from paper clips. Paper clips are terrible. Staples are terrible. Stop using them. Just put them together in a folder and label it. And you don't need to do any of that. I've spent more hours than I would like to admit removing paper clips and staples. And rubber bands, I didn't have a good picture for that, but it looks like spaghetti. It's kind of gross. They just dry out and crumble and they leave gross marks all over your paper. It can damage if there was an image underneath the, the rubber band, like it's damaged. So the last thing, of course, is if there's bugs. Silverfish love paper collections. Cockroaches love cardboard. Bugs love boxes. So if you open a box and you're noticing there's bugs, probably not the best way to store it. Let's move it inside. I do have this illustration here. Tape is also incredibly time consuming and incredibly expensive to remove. Don't tape paper together. So how should you store your collection? It depends. I don't know what you have. So we'll talk about just a quick overview. But you'll hear us say that a lot if you ever talk to an archivist, that it depends on a lot of different factors. This is an example project of a client who thought they had stored everything really well. And they brought it to us because they wanted us to scan them, and we started looking at it and we're like, well, this is actually in 2 pieces. And I think we could probably help you get a better scan of this. And so we went through and flattened and mended the paper with archival tissue in a wheat paste, and we're able to put it all back together as best as we could without losing its original structure. So the history of the paper is still there, and that is a big difference between conservators and what we're doing, which is a soft conservation treatment as an archivist. So what they did was they folded it in another piece of paper. She put a description on there, which was more than most people. I will say that. I was like, that's good. That's good. But it just says indentured paper. It doesn't say indentured papers. So if she was to, pass away and somebody had to go through her house and, try to figure out what was important to keep of hers, it's possible these 2 pieces of paper could have been separated or one could have been thrown out. It was, of course, not in the best shape. It was very discolored and there was quite a bit of water damage, which isn't that big of a deal. It's an old piece of paper. Things like that are going to happen and they're definitely going to show their age, and that's fine. But we definitely want to make sure that we are not lacking description. The second piece was also folded. As you can see over here, the top part of the paper was folded with the paper that she folded it in. There was a lot of tears and loss. Again, when we fold paper a lot, with time, you're going to start to see holes in those areas just from being open and closed. The paper becomes weak and the corners start to fall apart like this on the folded areas, which again is not uncommon, but we want our paper to be flat generally when we're storing it and unfolded. And staining here, which it's hard to say what it's from, but a lot of times when we're holding paper with oils on our hands, with due time, it will start to change the paper and it will start to actually eat away at the paper. So that wasn't great. So again, we were able to put that back together. We stored it flat. We had it just in a normal folder and then a drop front box. So it was easy to store. And of course, both parts of the paper were put back together. So now we're not going to lose them. That's always a risk that I think we all overlook, is that we don't aggregate our collection and we don't really know what we have. And so if there was something terrible to happen, like what would be saved from our own personal collections? And this had been passed down to her through several generations, and it wouldn't have been crazy for it to have been separated forever. So it's important to keep things together and not damage your important collections further by folding them on accident. So yeah, we want a description, we want a date, and we want everything together. This ensures the posterity of the items. It ensures that your material is stabilized and it allows you to handle them. For that specific, that indentured servitude paper, we actually encapsulated that so she could pick it up and hold it, and didn't have to worry about that. By doing that, we basically just seal it in a Mylar envelope, so it could be removed should it need be, but it allows you to touch it. And that's really important when you want to share your items, is you want to touch them. It's not a museum, it's family history. So we want to provide that peace of mind and allow you to have access and safe handling of your collections. So the best practices here are stable temperatures. We do not want to store things on exterior walls. We want to store them on interior walls in the most stable place in your house, wherever that may be. Somewhere without temperature fluctuations, somewhere that has low humidity, limited light and UV exposure. We want to handle our collections with clean hands so we don't stain them or transfer oils to them. And we want to group similar sized items. So when we talk about archival storage, it gets kind of a little wild because it's a marketing term. And so you can go to Hobby Lobby or you could go to Michael's, and they absolutely do have archival paper and archival this and archival that, but it's not. It's acid free, which is great. So buy that by all means. But when we're talking about long-term storage, we need buffered storage. Possibly, it depends on the material we have. We need it to be reinforced. We want to be able to stack our boxes and not have them fall apart. Otherwise, what's the point of a long-term box that's not going to stay together? I think even for Ellen's album that we showed earlier, that was only 20 years old, so we want to go longer than that. So the acid-free is really, really important. As we can see here, we have, it's like ghosting. It's a little neighbor that used to be on top of this. When we mix materials and we have one thing, like a newsprint, it's really easy for that to transfer onto the other paper. So it's crucial to separate material. We cannot store things together all in a box. Like, this is my family history shoebox. Like, we can't do that. Not for long-term storage. We need to focus our attention on the acid-free for sure, because if we get acidic paper, such as newsprint, construction paper, craft paper, basically any paper produced before 1980, you're going to have yellowing, it's going to become brittle, and it's going to fall apart, because wood pulp paper was very common. and the grain of the paper is very short because it's pulp and not fiber, and so it will eventually become brittle and just break. And it'll also damage other things that it's touching. So buffered versus non-buffered, a lot of people ask this. I'll send them on their way to find archival storage, and they'll be like, wait, it says it's buffered, do I need that? Well, I don't know, it depends. What do you have? What are we storing? The easiest way to remember if we're looking for buffered or non-buffered is generally for anything paper-based or your common collection items. Buffered is totally acceptable. However, if you have anything made from an animal product, you probably want non-buffered. It just doesn't like it. So that's what we're doing. It's basically just a way to neutralize any acid. And for whatever reason, animal products do not like buffered material. So it's more common to find buffered storage, especially in the resources that I think Heather's going to share later. But yeah, so just keep that in mind, that if you have a piece like a wool textile of some sort, like do non-buffered. If you have older photographs, some of them require non-buffered storage as well. And if you aren't sure what types of photographs you have, use Graphic Atlas. It's a really great way to identify photograph types, and Heather will share that link in a bit. So lignin free, yeah, this is our wood pulp paper. So we don't want this. We don't want lignin free at all, or lignin in our collections whatsoever when it's left in paper, because it's made from the wood pulp, as I discussed briefly. It just becomes acidic and it breaks down. That's why newsprint breaks down, everything turns yellow. If you've ever had an old newspaper and you just touched it and it cracked, it's the lignin. So again, lignin free, acid free, probably buffered storage is what we're looking for, and something that passes the photographic activity test. This is really common for archival methods, has a lot of photograph storage solutions for the general public as well as institutions. They sell to both. They will have everything listed if it passes PAT or not. We don't want the chemical reactions in old slide pages to start to stick or break down or become gummy. So if we just make sure that it passes the PAT, then we'll be golden and we won't have to worry about that. But it's listed for everything. And then our safe plastics. So archival plastic enclosures need to be made from polyester, polypropylene, or polyethylene. We need inert plastics. Polyester is the most inert out of all three. When we talk about mylar or encapsulation, generally that's a polyester, an archival polyester. Polypropylene is really stiff and it's very chemically stable. Also, you'll find a lot of photograph enclosures made out of that. But the problem with archival polyester is you need to be careful when using it, and not just, one, it's kind of expensive, but two, you can't just put it on everything because it has a static electric charge to it. So if we were to put pastel paintings inside of a mylar envelope, it's going to pull the image up. So regardless, we do not want to store in plastic bins. We do not want to store in a Rubbermaid container or anything you can buy at Target, probably. Just check these numbers. So I put them up there, write them down. Those are the safe storage if you must put your storage in plastic, but there are a million reasons why you should stop doing that. They hold moisture. You're more likely to mix materials because it's really easy just to start throwing things in a bin. It's just not a good way to go about things, mostly because it can't breathe. But the other is, of course, that you can get the wrong plastic and it can off gas and actually affect your collection negatively. So pencil only zone, please. Don't use pens, labels, tape. Don't use staples. Don't use any metal fastener. And don't eat or drink near your collection. It's really just that easy. Write with a pencil all over things. It's totally fine. You can do that. You can write, "This was grandma," or whatever on the back of a photo, or put it even, in the margin of a thing on a piece of paper if you must. And, because a lot of people want to include context, and you should do that, but don't do it with a pen. Pens will leach onto the front of your photograph. It'll eventually start ghosting and distort the image. It can also cause all sorts of fallout. If you have really old letters, they were wrote generally with this like homemade ink called lamp black, and it'll fall right out. It's called lacing, and you'll start to see like these lacings across the pages because the ink will literally just start to fall out. So pencil doesn't do that at all, ever. So just use a pencil all the time. And plus you don't want to accidentally mark on your collection when you have it sitting out on the table and the pen rolls across and you put your elbow on it and oops. So just use a pencil. And display copies. Put the original on a scanner and scan it, and then display that. We have a collection that came through recently where one of our clients had framed some family history documents, and he did not use museum glass and he did not use proper conservation grade mat board. And they were taped into the mats with masking tape. And unfortunately, because there was masking tape or tape in general around the edges of all of these prints, it had completely discolored all of the borders. The paper was really brittle and the mats were very acidic. And so the paper just had to go through a whole process to be preserved and stabilized because it's a risky bet when you start putting things on the wall and you have the sun shining right into it and you're going to bleach out the print. Like in this one specifically, the ink had faded so much that it was actually hard to read. So I always tell people display your copies, have really good copies made and put them up. Nobody will ever know, and put the original somewhere safe. Of course, there's always the risk of the frame falling and breaking and then, damaging whatever is behind the glass. But ultimately, it's the UV light that's going to get it, and it's going to be the acidic mat boards or backer boards. And you don't know how Hobby Lobby or Michaels is framing things. And I'm not to say they're not doing a good job, but it's really important that you take steps to ensure that you're using museum and conservation grade supplies when framing, regardless. Again, at minimum, include context for all items. If you are going through your collection to do that survey to see what you have, that is a great time to grab a pencil and write on the back of all of your photos, oh, this doesn't say who it is. This is, so-and-so. So full name, not grandma, not Bill's wife, not, Aunt Jenny, whatever nickname she has that nobody will be able to trace, 3 generations later, write their full name, even a maiden name. That's super helpful. Any dates, if you're not sure, put a range, like maybe 1960. If there's a location, put that down. Any known contacts, like why was this picture taken? What's going on? Is it so-and-so's birthday party? Is it a wedding? And then any clues. If you don't know what's going on, you can just write that where you received the photo. Like this photo was given to me by, my great grandmother, whatever. And just hope that maybe somebody will want to take the time eventually to backtrack that and figure it out. But not having any context and having photos, they end up in thrift stores. People donate them. People will throw them out. You think they're important and you're like, oh, I'm going to hold on to these forever because I know somebody will want them, but your grandkids are going to go through your house and they're going to throw them out. So write down who it is so they can feel that connection, or, oh, this must be important. Like, I think I remember her name, even if they don't recognize them, something will trigger and they will be more likely to keep them than if they don't know who any of the people are or why this picture exists. It happens all the time. I've had people bring stuff in here and we'll start going through all their pictures and they'll be like, actually don't do these because I don't know who these people are. So yeah, not good. When we're talking about minimums of what to do, we want to interleave all of our materials, especially if we're doing the bare minimum and we don't really know what we have or what we're doing. For general people, I think it's really important that they interleave materials because you're less likely to have that ghosting or that neighbor shadowing on other things. So it's totally fine to put a piece of newsprint in with your letters because it was included in the letters if we separate it out and put an acid-free piece of paper between them. the way to go about that is really just that simple. You can just go grab acid-free paper. If you want to be like super on top of things, get bond paper. Anything with cotton content over 25% is great. It will last 200 plus years. So that's generally the rule of thumb on that. But yeah, we want good storage. That's our minimum. Interleave your items now, today. If you know there's something over there with newsprint and it's touching other paper, go interleave it with a piece of computer paper. It's probably acid free. It's better than nothing. And folder and store everything in boxes, in archival boxes. Again, there will be resources for you guys to all research that, including like bad things in collections, like what the damage looks like long term. So yeah, now we can do questions and we can hear all about everything that everybody has and hope that we can figure something out to make it better. So that's
Thank you so much, Brooke. That was super informative. And I was quickly going to pop in the link of the examples gone awry so people can see, I think, even more of what you were talking about there.
Yeah, that's the best one because it really drives it home. When you start to see what something as silly as a paper clip can do, I don't know, it's a little mind blowing. I know even with some of my first processing jobs, I was, what is going on? Because you don't see it, you know? So
And
you
you
want to know
don't
what you're
think
doing.
about it.
No,
Yeah,
you
like
don't.
you do a good thing. You're putting it together, and then decades later, you're going through like, well, in my case, going through like grandparents and parent stuff. You come across, like you were saying, the rubber bands, the paper clips, the adhesive tape, and it's just like, oh my gosh, I can't separate these, or there's damage done, or there's, you know, but you know they had the best intentions. They were trying to put it together for us. But it's, I think your tips are really helpful, and I definitely have a bunch I've got to go do with regards to, you know, my daughter's photos and things I want to keep for her after hearing this. So jumping into questions, we've got a bunch.
I know.
I think one of the first ones is what are the biggest misperceptions about archival preservation and the work that our archivists do? I know you touched on this briefly at the beginning, but if you could delve a little bit deeper into like what are some of the things you encounter when you first start talking with people that come to you to, like, you know, help me save this object or this thing.
So a lot of people don't realize that they can donate their items to archives. That happens a lot. A lot of people don't realize the importance of what they actually have, or they'll pass it off like, well, why would anybody care about this? You know, it's just my old notebook, or, you know, whatever the thing is that they're talking about. So I do think it's a problem, and I think it's a problem with the archival profession as well as the general public not realizing that we archivists are accessible and we really do want to help you. But it's not something that's marketed as, you know, like a service that, hey, like we'll take your stuff. Like, even if you're just a regular person, like we want it. Like, community archives love to receive donations of people from the community. Otherwise, how are we to track the changes in our cities or, you know, the historical atmosphere at any given moment if we don't have actual narratives from regular people? We don't want history just to be wrote by the winners, of course. So, you know, donating, like I was saying earlier, like your grandma's, you know, garden club membership information can go a really long way in somebody's research or to document community, you know, involvement over time. I mean, there's a million different ways that people can use items that we're not thinking about because they haven't used them yet, you know. So I think just the accessibility and that we are all here to help you, whether it's me in the private sector or my friends who work in the public sector, like we're all here to assist you to save your things as well as your stories.
think that's a great reminder. We had one of our earliest beta members coming out of beta with Artifacts. Her feedback was, it's like a museum to humanity. Like we are every day, like we are alive and we're creating history. We may not know it, but 20 years, like hindsight's great. But looking back on it, like to your point, there could very well be something in grandma's gardening club or any of the other documents, or like that letter you talked about, that might not have seemed historic in that moment when it was penned, but looking back 200 years like later, it's like, wow, that is a piece of family history. So I think that's really great advice you've got, is just recognizing that every day we are creating bits of history, and to preserve them and archive them the best that we possibly can. Jumping into another question, protecting the privacy of all involved, can you share with us some of your most favorite projects or types of projects you really enjoy working on?
I really like the paper mending projects. Anytime that we can put things back together is just awesome. That's a good day here. There's a certain satisfaction of being able to clean and flatten a piece of paper that was, I mean, this one wasn't just discarded at all. Like, it was very much kept, and she thought she was doing the right thing. And honestly, it's better than what she could have been doing, so there was an attempt that was appreciated on my behalf. But just to be able to put all that back together is great and so much fun.
That's awesome. If I'm not mistaken, paper has a really important part of your story, and I think your love for archives. Early on, didn't you work with one of the largest private collections of Civil War documents?
I did. When I
What was that like?
Overwhelming, just because I knew that they were so important, and they were being all donated to a university archive. And so it was, even working in institutions, there is we're stewards of this information, but it's being housed there, in that place. So working in the private sector and working on these documents that were coming from a donor that were then going into an archive was a little intimidating, but it was also very one of the best things that I've ever done in my whole life, for sure. It was very, very enjoyable.
That's very cool. Speaking of intimidating and challenging, what are some of your most challenging projects or challenging questions you get when you're dealing with the archival kind of span of what you actually get to touch and work with?
Tape removal.
It sounds like that's the bane of existence, especially from the photos you showed.
Yes, and I think most archivists will agree with me on this one, but yeah, tape is terrible. It takes hours, or it depends on the type of tape. Certain tapes, cellophane tape, will start to shrink, and it'll eventually just fall off and leave that yellow line, and that's all good and dandy, because at least the it's off. But yeah, it can take hours to remove 2 inches of tape. And sometimes we have to have it removed, like the clients really want it removed, or the institution really needs it removed. So you should think about that before you tape your child's art project, because that could be the next Van Gogh, and now it's sitting in a museum and somebody's spending an entire semester trying to remove tape as an intern, and that's not fair, so to anybody, including the drawing. But yeah, tape is by far the most challenging. Having people bring things in with tape and being like, I don't know if we're actually going to be able to remove this without damaging the paper, or I don't know if we can remove this just because of time considerations, is hard.
So it sounds like tape, regardless of type, is a no-go. It's one of your top tips,
Yeah.
like do not do under any circumstance.
Yep.
What are some of your other, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
So what are some of your other top tips that either do or don't do?
If you're worried about things not being together, like staples, they do make plastic clips. You can put those on there. The other thing is you can just folder them, and it's going to be okay, because it'll be okay. It's going to be better than the long term of having it rust through and put holes in the paper, and then damaging, like possibly losing words. And then as for tape, it's just completely unnecessary. So scrapbooking, anything like that, you're just damaging your collection long term, and you mean well. And it's hard to tell people, like, I know you put so much time into this and so much effort, but long term, it's not going to make it. Just like when we look at these black scrapbook pages from, photo albums from the 1930s and 40s that our grandparents kept, and they're literally disintegrating. It's, that's just going to happen again. So it's okay to put things in a box and slip notes in instead. Interleave with a piece of paper and write in pencil if you don't want to write on your photos, like what's going on here. Like that's sufficient, because ultimately all we're doing is trying to tell our story and through scrapbooks or whatever. And so you can do that with a sheet of paper, or you can do that on Artifacts, even better.
Thank you. Yes, we agree. There's a lot, I think, synergies where, to your earlier point, if you're taking the time to preserve, to archive the object, I'm going to get the verbiage correct. If you take the time to archive the object and to ensure that's going to last for generations to come, take the time also to artifact it and tell the story and share it with folks. And that way, it's not just, in the case of having multiple siblings, maybe it's one person has the actual item, be it the baptismal gown or that letter that great grandpa wrote great grandma back during the war. But they can all see the actual object. They can all read the story, or listen to the story if it has been artifacted and shared that way. Sorry, Ellen, I think you've got a question.
Hey, Brooke, I actually do have a question. Can you back up a step? So the is it lignin? Lignin free, is that something you actually see on a product label? It'll say, like, everyone's used to acid free. I actually hadn't heard of that one. And so I'm just wondering, will I see it actually on labels in a shop?
No, probably not. What you're going to have to do is shop from an archival supplier. So University Products is great. They have a little bit of everything. Everything will be marked on there, or archival methods. If it's acid free, passes PAT, this, that, or the other thing. But no, normal big box stores are not going to tell you any of these things, because again, archival quality, museum quality is a marketing term. There's no standard behind those words. And so the only way you're going to ensure that you're getting the correct thing is if you buy it from the correct shop. And there's really only a handful of suppliers that are online that you can buy from. So University Products, Gaylord Archival, which I don't think I have that link, but
and we actually have it in our FAQs when we talk about how to attach QR codes. And so we can put that in, and I already put in a link to our article where we mentioned SAA. So we have that as well. And I'll pop that in. Another question, unless I'm looking if anyone else interrupts, but another question I had when you were talking about framing is a big industry, right? And I have a couple that I use locally. I have some that I order, like I just upload a photo and then they send me the, so I am curious, and if anyone's read our article on digitizing negatives and VHS tapes, that was also highly educational. Brooke has a very high tolerance for my questions. But what I'm wondering is, for all of our awareness, like if you're just out of, habit, and I'm not picking on Michael's, I'm not picking on Framebridge or anybody, but like if out of habit, I'm just going to one of these, is that usually an option to choose, a certain standard, or is it generally not available and you need to go to one of these archival websites?
No, actually most art stores will sell mats that are conservation grade. So when you're looking for archival mats, the most important is to have it be buffered, assuming it's the right type of print, and to have it acid free. So that's super easy to find. That's probably one of the more accessible things to find, I would say. And when you go into Michael's, I'm almost positive, I don't know about Hobby Lobby, but Michael's does have UV glass. It is an upcharge. You will pay for it. It will be expensive. I think a lot of people bypass these options that are available. And I know that Michael's for sure has all of these options available, as an example, but it gets really expensive. And so that's why we're like, if you just want to throw it in a frame, just have a copy made. Nobody's gonna know. Nobody's gonna know that it's not the original. And then folder the original and put it away somewhere safe. Group your photos together, so that everything's same size, so we're not bending, and it'll be fine. Like it'll be okay. But
when it's something large and you can't just put it in a folder, then what do you recommend if you do make that copy and want to store like a large original?
like a print, you can
roll it. Okay. And there's probably that paper then that goes in.
Yeah, you would do like you would put it on a thin piece of paper and you would roll it up.
Okay.
They have boxes for that too. They even have acid-free buffered tubes to roll onto. I mean, rolling is not the best way you can do things, but again, we need to make things accessible. It's better than folding it. And most people don't have flat files in their house, so there's only so much we can do.
Yeah, we're regular people.
So rolling it's fine. And if it ever needs to be flattened, then either an archivist or a conservator can flatten it for you, and it won't cost you as much as it would cost you to repair all of the loss from it being folded, is probably the best way to put it.
That makes sense. Okay, I swear I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you, Brooke. We have a question from one of our audience members. The question is, do you see stuff come through your company that you recommend people put into a specific collection? You might see things that connect the dots that individuals may not even know about. I'm thinking like the lost twin syndromes, where they never knew, but someone somewhere connected the dots.
Occasionally, yeah. If I'm understanding the question correctly, there's definitely been collections that have come through where people were like, I have all this stuff, I feel like I need to be the steward of it, so I'm going to deal with it, but I don't know what to deal with it because I don't actually want it. Generally, in those instances, we will help we'll either direct people to an archive, repository, museum, library, somewhere where that collection would fit into their collection scope, where they would be likely to take the donation. But usually we deal with just family collections and the people want to keep it. And so we don't usually try to push people to donate their items. So that conversation doesn't come up as much as I would like to bring it up, because there's definitely been things that have come through, and I have to keep client confidentiality because we don't like to discuss collections openly or our clients, but there have been things that have come through where I've been like, man, I know a really nice place for this. Hopefully someday they will want to go that route, but it's okay if they don't.
No, that's great. And you did, one of the links we popped into chat was for the American Archivist Association. So is that a resource people have a question like, I've got this collection, but I don't, like, should I keep it? Should I donate it? Where would they go with that?
So that's hard. So you could call your local historic society or history center, whatever you may have in your town. And you can usually speak to a reference librarian and they can help direct you to the right resources. But there is independent archivist consultation, there's an independent archivist section on the SAA where archivists list themselves as being available for work or to advertise their business. It's a great resource that doesn't get thrown around a whole lot. I'm on there. I know some of my fellow colleagues are on there, but you can put in your state or a zip code and it will bring up archivists that are trained, that have their degrees, that have the knowledge and have the expertise to assist you.
I'm going to pop the link into chat again because we had it a little ways back, but since you just talked about it, I'll put it in again.
Yeah.
Brooke, are there, we talked about what not to do, and we talked about things that you could do instead. If you're just, essentially stressed for time, you're part of that sandwich generation, you've got, young kids or just kids, you've got aging parents, you're trying to deal with stuff that's coming in the door every single day, from art projects to whatever it happens to be. And then you're also like having to go through like maybe multiple generations of stuff as parents downsize. When you're kind of in that state of you have so much stuff, but you don't have time to get to it, start thinking about it in the archival sense right away. Is there kind of like an in-between step before you get ready, like to archive it? Is there, do you recommend sorting stuff? Do you recommend like, what could you do if you're overwhelmed by stuff, but you don't really know, you're not quite ready to start because you just don't have the time? Like what's that kind of that good in-between step, or is there one in your mind?
I mean, it depends on what you have. So there are things you can do. There are best practices, right? So one thing that's super easy and accessible to everybody is to just start interleaving. If you have things coming in the door, like your kids' art projects, right? That's a great example because everybody has too many of those. Just start interleaving them in a folder, you know, put them in the drop file at home, leave it alone. You'll also have an order, right? You're creating an order. That original order is now theirs. So when it gets passed on, more likely than not, you know, we're going to have second grade, third grade, fourth grade. It's going to be moving through there. So you're doing it in real time without actually putting a lot of effort into it. Putting those notes on the back are really important, right? Like on the back of, you know, sentimental items like papers and such, is to write those notes on the back of what it is. Because how many of us have art projects that we've gone through for our kids and we're like, I don't actually remember which one made this because it's just in a pile and we don't know. You know, so putting the names on the back and a date is good enough. You know, a title, even better. There's a story behind it, include that. You know, the same thing that you would do on Artifacts is what we really want to do on the paper. Like we're capturing metadata without meaning to, right? Because we're writing a title, we're writing a name, we're putting a date in. Those are the important things that I think are the most important, right? Is keeping the material safe. Best way to do that, to start interleaving. It's low bar. And then writing, including that context. Another thing, if you're inheriting a collection, which happens a lot, and you're not sure where to start, keeping the order while you're doing the survey is basically mandatory. It will help you in the long run. If you start separating out, I see so many people where they're like, well, I started separating my photos by people. And you're like, wait, but what if there's multiple people in the photo? Like, where does that go? And now we don't have, you know, like the graduation in a single stack, or we don't have this, and, you know, it gets mixed up and then we kind of lose that whole context. So just keep the order and write the titles.
And I know we're almost out of time, but I have one more question to ask. So when order is not maintained, it's just chaos. It's like a drawer full of letters. Is the starting point just scan them, get them scanned, get them registered? Like, what do you do when it's just a pile of old letters and you're not even looking at them because they're just in a pile? Like, where do you start with? Just imagine someone takes a drawer and hands it to you and says, here you go. And it's full of old letters. What do you do then? You open them all, do the paper between, like, what do you do then if it's just a whole? Because I know so many people that we even meet with drawers and boxes of old letters.
So if there really isn't an order, and there really isn't an order, then pick an order and start doing that before you start doing any digitization, because it's going to be a lot easier if you get them in order now, and then file name works, you know, it's all consistent all the way through and standardized, than to not. So, you know, you have a million different ways you can go about doing the order. Chronological, of course, makes the most sense. Sometimes that's hard to do because the letters aren't dated, but maybe there's a post stamp on the front. You know, so there, you know, you just kind of have to be a detective to a degree. The other is, you know, grouping things by subject. That would be like your art projects, right? Like this was from art class and this was from a school project, right? So really it's up to the person, and it's okay to take intellectual control if there really is not an order to pull from. I like to keep things in the creator's order. There's a reason they were like that. So that's important, and it's important to respect that. But if they literally got moved out of one house and the drawer was dumped and now it's in your house and, you know, whatever, then I think that's fair game to try to go through and, you know, get some sequential order of some sort going that makes sense for you, because otherwise you can't access it at all because you don't know what's going on.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's great.
So pick an order and just run with it.
That's really good advice, and something that I've got to start doing, I think, more on my own right now with all that's coming in the front door with the children. So with that, Brooke, we are done with our evening with artifacts. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for all the advice and the tips and the explanation of what is an archivist and what do you do and how do you help people ensure that what they bring to you will last for generations to come. I personally found it incredibly helpful, and we'll be doing, I think, all of your quick and easy top 3, top 4 tips. And I will definitely stop putting paper clips on my paper products. I promise. I've popped your information into the chat. If people want to reach out to you, check out your website, Monocurate. Brooke has been a tremendous resource. She is one of our partners. And we really do believe in the need to preserve all of that history. Again, what we create on a daily basis. Brooke is a really big piece of that with her company, helping people, again, archive those physical objects. And with that, I want to say a big thank you and really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, awesome.
And thank you to all of our viewers. We look forward to seeing you next week as Evenings with Artifacts continues.
Great.
All right. Good night.
Good night.